Talk 1600. You're catching the drift. Conservative talk. Intelligent conversations on local, state, and national issues with Gary Wellings, chief editor of the Current newspaper and Current Online. Join in the conversation at 734-822-1600. And now, your host, Gary Wellings.
Hey, fooled you. It's not Gary Wellings. I'm your host, Ed Bonderenka. Gary's off on holiday. Assignment today. Gary's doing some very important work for the show, and I'm sure he's going to report back to us on it next Saturday afternoon. He'll probably be well tanned when he does it. So joining me in studio is Alex Wassell, a familiar voice lately. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Ed. Great to be back again.
Well, that's good, man. You are really doing yeoman's duty here, just one week after another. We just skate off and leave it all on your shoulders.
Well, the price is right.
Well, we're going to double what we pay you.
Wow.
You know that, don't you? You get double. You get triple overtime today.
That's good.
That's good. All right. So what we do here is review the news, particularly the news at thedailydrift.com. That's where you go for
the news you need to know.
Doggone it. You know what? You're doing really well there, really well. Yep. You want to take advantage. You want to go to thedailydrift.com and get the news you need to know on a daily basis. Gary puts that together for you so you don't have to hunt all over the interwebs, and you can actually just chill out, read it on one page, and be well informed. So, and then there's the Current newspaper. You definitely want to be reading the Current newspaper. Get the local news you need to know around the Whitmore Lake, Livingston County, part of Ann Arbor area, and take advantage of the advertisers who advertise there and let them know you saw it, the Current. You heard them on the Drift because it's what pays the bills, supplies the local content. So, let's see now. One of the advertisers actually is Sutton Barn. And if you have an event you're going to be holding, like a corporate fundraiser, corporate meeting, golf outing, you definitely want to take advantage of Sutton Barn. And it's wonderful rustic atmosphere there. It's a venue that it emulates actually being up north without the exceedingly long drive, Really nice. They've got dining facilities there. They got a golf course nearby. Take advantage of it. And if I could find the address for it, I'd tell you what it is, But, I can't, so I'll tell you later.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. So today we have William Federer calling in, and he's actually on the line right now, and we'll hook up with him in a second and talk to him. Bill is the host of the American Minute, and it's a daily radio minute heard around the country. He's an author of a number of books. And actually, let's let Bill talk for himself a little bit. Derek, you want to bring Bill on the line? Thank you. Hey, Bill, welcome back.
Hey, well, great to be with you.
Good to have you. I remember our talk last year, our visit last year. I remember you spent the night in our house, and we had a wonderful time talking to you. So at that time, you were telling us about the founding of the country and the Islamic influence on the founding of our country. So what would you like to talk about today?
Well, today, July 28th, in the year 1868, the 14th Amendment was passed. And I thought it would be interesting to give a little bit of a background on it because it has to do with race politics. And we see race politics today. But I think people would be fascinating to know which party actually supported civil rights for blacks and which party refused to support it and actually started the KKK against them.
Well, that's easy. Lincoln was a Democrat, right? And the KKK is a bunch of Republicans, right?
Well, it's the opposite. But the history is quite fascinating. What I do, I send out a daily email, and it covers pieces of history that sort of fit in with issues that are going on today. So it's called American Minute. That's my daily email. And the one for today is on this topic. It was in 1857. The Supreme Court, now 7 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court were Democrat. The Supreme Court decided that Dred Scott was property. Now, who was Dred Scott? He was a slave to a person in Missouri, but then the person goes, he was in the military, he goes to several other states, Illinois, Wisconsin, comes back to Missouri, and some white friends of his say, well, you were living in free states, Illinois, Wisconsin, you could have just walked away from your master, and they couldn't have done anything, and they sue for his freedom, and it goes all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Democrat-appointed Chief Justice, Roger Taney, he was appointed by Andrew Jackson, who was the founder of the Democrat Party, who owned slaves. Roger Taney said that slaves were so far inferior that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for their own benefit. Wow, talk about a racist decision. Well, Lincoln, Republican, issues the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, it's his personal proclamation as a president, doesn't have the force of law, and so Republicans pushed through the 13th Amendment, which officially abolished slavery. That was December 6th of 1865. Well, the southern states, Democrat, they were forced to free the slaves, but they began passing what's called black codes. Now, what are those? Those are laws that basically reinstate slavery. That says every freed slave has to have a job, no loitering along the streets for unemployed, and you would have two of these white Democrats would witness them signing an employment contract. Well, the employment contract says that you can't leave your employer. That basically reinstitutes slavery. They were apprenticed to employers, but it was sort of like a permanent apprenticeship.
Indentured servitude?
Right. And so this was the fate of these sharecroppers. And so now Jim Crow laws, black codes were also called Jim Crow laws. And that's taken from an 1828 New Orleans riverboat song called Jump Jim Crow, in which a black-faced performer would appear in a mocking caricature and dance and, say, wheel about and turn about, and just so every time I wheel about, I jump Jim Crow. And anyway, it's a long song, but that's the refrain. And so they ended up calling these black codes Jim Crow laws. And some of them, or all of them, were racist, but it's interesting, many of them specifically forbade blacks from owning guns. So in Mississippi in 1865, the black code said no freedman, which is a African-American that was a slave that got free. So no freedman, Negro, or mulatto shall carry or keep firearms or ammunition. Sort of interesting. Here you have these Democrat black codes wanting to take away guns from black people.
Again.
And, So the Republicans denounced these Southern black codes for institutionalizing discrimination. And so a Republican in Congress named Thaddeus Stevens, he introduced legislation to give former slaves 40 acres and a mule. But the Democrats, led by President Andrew Johnson, opposed it. And then the Republicans in 1866 overrode President Johnson's veto, and they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, conferring right of citizenship on freed slaves. And the situation was that you were actually a citizen of your state. There was no such thing as a United States citizen. You were a citizen of your state, and sort of like your driver's license is issued by your state. But the southern states were refusing to grant citizenship rights to former slaves. We're like, we're our own state. We can grant it to whoever we want. And so the Republicans push through the 14th Amendment. 100% of Democrats voted against it. So the Republicans pushed through the 14th Amendment on this day, July 28th, 1868, which forced the southern Democrat states to give rights to the freed slaves. And so it's an important part of history. And I'll pause here, but there's more that I'd like to share on it that I think listeners will find interesting.
Wow. Well, that was quite the tour de force right there. You brought up a number of things that, was it Brian Kilmeade, the Fox guy, who's a conservative commentator on the radio? he was pushing a book and a show he did on Jackson, trying to make Jackson look like a good guy, and that always puzzled me. And I never watched it because I just didn't want to get too confused. But, I mean, Jackson...
Well, so
go ahead.
Every person is a mixed bag, and Jackson is sort of the link between the Revolutionary era and the Civil War era. The good things he did, he fought the British during the War of 1812.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, Florida is a U.S. state because of Andrew Jackson. And that's why Jacksonville, Florida is named after him. He was a really good fighter. The British wanted to keep New Orleans. The British had landed at Pensacola. They took Pensacola, and they were giving guns to the Indians, telling them to attack Americans, and they would give them gold for scalps. And so in Fort Mims, Alabama, the Red Stick Creek Indians, armed by the British, massacred and scalped 500 people at Fort Mims, Alabama. And so Andrew Jackson, by the way, Red Stick is in French pronounced Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm.
And so Baton Rouge, Louisiana is named after the Red Stick Creek Indians. Well, Andrew Jackson defeats them. One of his young soldiers is Sam Houston. Andrew Jackson helps to form the state of Tennessee, and he actually proposed the name Tennessee, which was an old Indian name. And Andrew Jackson became the president. He was the only president ever to pay off the national debt. And if I were to say a positive thing that he did was, after the Revolution, you had Alexander Hamilton and some others say, well, we need to have a stable financial system where we need to borrow money like from English bankers and so forth. And so it was Alexander Hamilton that helped create the U.S. Treasury, and he also helped create the Bank of the United States, which was a private bank, and it had federal money deposited in the private bank. They thought, well, this way the federal government's not controlling the money, and so it'd be a little safer. Well, the problem was it also had investors, like at least 12 to 20% of the investments were from British people. And so this Bank of the United States with the federal money, and it was so big, it was setting the interest rates. All the other smaller banks had to go along. It would set the reserve requirements. And then by the time Andrew Jackson comes along, the Bank of the United States is headed up by a guy named Nicholas Biddle, who boasted of having more power than the president. And what did Biddle do? He owned politicians. He was like the George Soros of the day. And they were his puppets, and he would pay for their campaigns. He bought up the newspapers, sort of like the MSNBC and the CNN, and so he would have his newspapers say positive things about the candidates that he wanted in, and slam the candidates that he didn't want in. And he became so powerful that when Andrew Jackson became president, he put his foot down, and Andrew Jackson decides to pull the federal money out of Nicholas Biddle's Bank of the United States. And during this time, there's an assassination attempt on Andrew Jackson. The guy in the Capitol fires two pistols at him, and for some reason they don't go off. They just sort of smolder. Davy Crockett wrestles the assailant to the ground. And anyway, so that part of Andrew Jackson is what I consider positive. The negative part was the Indian Removal Act.
Trail of Tears.
He thought that the natives and the settlers wouldn't get along. And his answer was, well, let's just give all the Indians some land to the west and just move them out. It was one of those big government decisions, sort of like we got to hurry up and vote for this thing so we can find out what's in it, with the healthcare thing. And so this was, okay, yeah, let's just get all the Indians out, give them their own land. Well, the problem was these Indians had been here from time immemorial. They owned land. They had their own language. The Cherokee had a guy who invented their Cherokee language. They had farms, and many of them had become Christian. Mm-hmm. And there were actually Christian missionaries in Georgia with the Cherokee, and it was the Christian missionaries that brought a lawsuit to defend the Indians' rights to their land. Because the state of Georgia discovered gold, and these people were just rushing onto the Indians' land, digging for gold. When the Indians said, no, you can't, this is our land, they started a little fighting.